It's inscribed on our hearts. But that doesn't mean people always adhere to those principles, but they do acknowledge them. This is not true of those who follow these teachings of Marxism. And so I think we need to understand that they're not looking at this the same way we do.
No, not at all. They don't see the world from your framework. And for instance, if you're white, they're of the view that you are a racist. Now, this is something that I think many white people have had some difficulty coming to terms with. They're not entirely sure what this means. They see signs that speak of white supremacy, and they're thinking, well, where are all the KKK members? I mean, I don't know any, and I certainly don't belong to any such organizations. But see, what Black Lives Matter has done is that they have broadened, and this is part of cultural Marxism, they've broadened the definition of racism to mean basically anyone who is white. If you're white, you are by definition a racist. Mm-hmm. You can't escape it, they argue. You've been brought up to be racist. It's subtle. It's something you don't even know that you do. You just don't understand that you are in fact a racist, and you are a person who has white privilege, and therefore you are fair game.
All right, Larry Taunton, let me ask you this question. We've had a little bit of time to unpack Marxism, cultural Marxism, critical race theory, what's happening, what's kind of behind this agenda, and from their own mouths, we've heard the organizers of Black Lives Matter say they've been trained in Marxist tactics and ideology. As believers, as Christians, the vast majority of our audience across the country, Christians, conservatives, how do we deal with this? Marxism and Christianity, oil and water, incompatible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just use a real basic example. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. That's what we find on our currency. The idea of the melting pot, that's what that is. These ideas, which are American ideas, are rooted in Christianity, and we find that expressed nowhere better in our founding documents than in the Declaration of Independence, where it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, right there, the founding fathers were making the claim, we are appealing to God in our complaint against the home country, against England, and against our oppression, and we argue that we are justified in rebelling because we're not being treated as having these certain unalienable rights. And so our Constitution seeks to make us one. We are all one in the sense that we're all Americans. We're all we share these truths to be to be self-evident, and they are confident, by the way, as well. Now compare that with what Black Lives Matter is doing here, with what the Marxists are doing. Any decent person I know, most of whom have been raised to believe that you don't judge a person by the color of their skin or by their economic status. You judge them by their character. Well, now Marxists are telling us, no. You're to judge people by the color of their skin. Right. You are to judge them by their gender. You are to judge them by their economic status. And so where the Christian faith and through our Constitution, our founding documents would seek to make us one, where there's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither male nor female, or slave nor free. This is exactly the opposite of what the Marxists are doing. They're atomizing society into groups of oppressed and oppressors. And if you're a white male, you're by definition an oppressor. If you are a black female, by definition, you are oppressed. This is what they're doing. And of course, the ideas that are at the core of this Marxist, this certain iteration of Marxism, are themselves inherently racist.
Mm-hmm.
That's the irony.
And of course, dividing into these groups, it aids their creation of discontentment, which gives them the power they need to undermine the system. Now, let's move in, before we run out of time, Larry Taunton, let's move into the secure? What do we do as Christians? How do we handle what we see unfolding on the streets? My suggestion is that, we not back up, we not be silent, we not hide in our subdivisions in our homes. But I think the antidote to the spread of this Marxist ideology is a vibrant and engaged Christianity.
Absolutely. Listen, there's a reason that the Marxists are attacking the church. They're attacking the Christian faith. They're burning Bibles. And the reason is because they understand, maybe better than many Christians do, that the foundation of Western civilization as we know it in America is the Christian faith. I mean, T.S. Eliot said this: if Christianity goes, the whole culture goes. They know that. And you see, the Marxists of Black Lives Matter and Antifa, they are seeking the destruction of society as we know it to create tabula rasa upon which they can build their new utopian Marxist state. So the response to this is a vibrant church that is unafraid in preaching the truth of the Christian faith. So it's not simply enough to oppose these ideas as wicked and out of the pit of hell, which of course they are, but it is understanding. I heard an old Billy Graham sermon recently in which he said this: we as people see lots of different groups, rich and poor and black and white and so on and so forth. He said God sees only two: those who are saved and those who are not. And I think that's the way we need to think about this. We need to be preaching, we need to be proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is an authentic salvation, opposing this very wicked secular version of salvation that can give no remission of sins.
Now, I'm not going to point to a man-made conspiracy. I'm not given to that, but I do believe I do believe that there is one who, from the very beginning, has tried to counter everything that God has done. And there is conspiracy, may not be man-made. But when we see all of this unfolding, don't you find it a little ironic, Larry, that many of the churches are shut down in America?
Yes, I do. And I love what John MacArthur did recently in opposing that and saying, no, we will continue to meet. Listen, churches here have to be, and their members, if your church is woke, you need to go to another church. I mean, you need to go to a place that sees Scripture as the final authority, and where the gospel, the salvation is preached through Jesus Christ alone. That is what we need in opposed to this. And by the way, I mentioned the last time I was on your show, I published an article called Karl Marx versus Charles Spurgeon. Both men lived in London at the same time for some 30 years, but I think it's very interesting that Marx mentions Spurgeon by name in his own letters. And what he saw, I believe, in Spurgeon was a man who embodied everything that he was trying to destroy. But because he wasn't successful, his preaching never happened in Britain.
The power of the gospel. And I would say in our country, the Judeo-Christian worldview, Christianity being so central to the foundation of our country, and it's been hammered away at for the last 60 years with intentionality. But if we don't repair those foundations, if we don't uphold that truth and not shrink back in silence and in fear, intimidated, which is, by the way, going back to Saul Alinsky, that's also part of their tactics, is to intimidate by marginalizing and silencing the opponent so that they have no opposition. They got a clear runway.
Great point.
For what they want to do. And so we're aiding them when we step back in silence out of fear of being labeled, as you said, a racist, because if you're white, you're racist. It works very well. It's kind of the trump card, if you will, in debate. You call someone a racist and it's over.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought this point up because I failed to do so earlier in our discussion. If you watch what Antifa and Black Lives Matter are doing, their tactics don't simply rely on the opponent having a moral core, but they they also are relying on their bombast and their threats to intimidate you. Fear is a primary tactic that we have here. And if I can only imagine where all this would be, where we would be in this cultural moment, if the Drew Breeses of the world had been able to stand their ground. And I'm not trying to pick on Drew Brees because I like him. I think he's a good guy. But Drew Brees, backed down when he was attacked, and as have many others. And you still have many others who are corporate, institutions that are donating millions of dollars to Black Lives Matter as a kind of protection money. We'll give you money if you don't smash our windows and if you leave us alone. That's what we're seeing taking place. And Americans have to stand their ground, not to be ridiculed into believing that this country is terrible and that their patriotism is wrong. These are the tactics they use, and they're relying on you responding in that way.
Yeah, just mentioning, everything about America is wrong. One thing, when you read the Bible as believers, in fact, one of the main reasons that God told the fathers to teach their children what he had done and where they had been was that most of the time the men made mistakes, and it was God's grace that brought them out. And so our history is not celebrating the fact that we were perfect, far from it, but it celebrates the redemptive nature of God and that he has brought America forward in spite of the mistakes and the decisions that we made that were contrary to his truth and his word.
Well, boy, don't I know it. I mean, Tony, I'm a sinful man. I walk in the grace of God. I walk in the confidence, not in my own human confidence. I walk in the confidence that the blood of Jesus Christ and his grace are sufficient even for me, a wretch. And I walk in the confidence that in spite of my sin and my failings and my imperfections, that God still wants to use me, and he wants to use me in this fight.